All right. So I wanted to go into what is your, talking with you, you played in the NFL for 8 years,
10 years.
10 years, 10
Yeah.
years. I'm not shorting you. I'm not trying to short you on
Oh,
anything.
it's all right. It's all right. I'm fine with that.
So 10 years in the NFL, leading like how to get to that point. What do you think, or what was your first exposure to training growing up?
Um, like you mean weights or just any in general?
Anything, anything.
I was about 6 years old. My older brother, I'm the youngest of three boys. My older brother's like 5.5, 6 years older than me. So maybe he was like 11, 12 years old. He got beat up by like some local bully, right? This kid who was, I can't remember his name. Might have been Brad Haney, might have been the name. But if Brad's listening, fuck you. Uh, no, that was good. So whatever, like local, like older kid, I guess beats up my brother. So he comes down, and my dad, who was really a smart dude, like graduated high school at like 16, college at 19, law school at 21, like really sharp dude, not a fighter. So instead of like sitting there fucking around with it, my dad was like straight up 80s karate style, karate kid style. Let's take him down to the local dojo. So there was a place that taught Shotokan karate. I mean, at the time it just said karate. Like they didn't get into all that stuff, but it was a Japanese style. So my dad takes my brother down there, and it's like wooden floors, super traditional, uh, you know, Japanese sensei. So it takes my brother down, and they start working on like whatever they worked on, and then my brother was coming home, and he was like practicing on my other brother and I. So after about a month, my dad just took all three of us and dumped us there.
Okay.
And I did that from the time I was 6 to probably about 10 years old. And then around 10 years old, I saw 1986 Hagler versus Hearns. My dad always liked boxing, so we'd always watch boxing and big fights. My dad's buddies would come over and watch. And I remember sitting there at 10, seeing Tommy Hearns and Marvin Hagler stand in the middle of the ring and just literally throw bombs at each other. Those guys
Hmm.
were in phenomenal shape. It's probably one of the best fights in the history of the world.
Yeah.
I saw that, and instantly the next morning I woke up and thought kicking was stupid. So I didn't want to. I didn't want to box, or I wanted to box. I didn't want to do martial arts anymore. So the problem is that all the boxing gyms were down in San Pedro. I lived in Torrance. There was nothing around. Like the closest place I could ride my bike was a kickboxing academy. So I went there and told them I wanted to learn to box, and they said, "Well, we do boxing and kicking," but they had a ring. So I trained in that until I went to high school, and basically my older brothers played college football, and they were pretty big football players, but I wanted to lift weights. Like from the time I was probably 10, 11 years old, I wanted to lift weights. And that started in another interesting moment. And I've had, 800 podcasts to be able to reflect on this. So if it doesn't, so it might seem kind of canned, but it's not. In Southern California, they have this thing called junior lifeguards. For those of you guys that are listening, so in Southern California, around 9 years old, they have this almost lifeguard apprentice program the kids at the beach go to. If you live near the beach, everybody does junior lifeguards.
Hmm.
And the idea is that you start when you're 9, you go through it, and around 17 or 18, you take the lifeguard test, and then you basically just get to chill on the beach and hit on chicks as a lifeguard. So I started at 9, around 10 or 11. I'd been in it a year or two. We were at like one of the lifeguard stations doing CPR on a dummy. And over in the distance, it sounded like a riot was going on. So we like popped up, as these like, overly important young lifeguards, what's going on over there? Did somebody fall? And we realized that it wasn't anybody falling and nothing. It was actually a guy walking down the Strand in like a tank top and a set of shorts. And people were like parting the sea and almost like like gasping at the size of this dude. And he was a defensive tackle for the Raiders, a guy named Lyle Alzado, who was pretty famous, ended up
Yeah.
passing away, but just an absolute fucking monster. So we see this guy, and we like start following him, and he like turns around and stomps at us and shit. And we ran away like little kids. And I remember thinking like, fuck, dude, I want to be big and strong. Like I didn't
Hmm.
necessarily know how it happened, but I was pretty sure that weights were involved. I didn't know if you had to lift them or maybe you were just around them through osmosis, you'd just get bigger. So I joined the football team in high school because I wanted to lift weights and be big and strong. And I figured that was the place for it. So I started lifting weights and was pitifully weak when I was young and had zero mentorship and zero coaching and just was trying to do anything I can. And then there was an old power lifter who, would occasionally come to the high school. He owned a nutrition company, Marathon Nutrition. He invented the super soups and the wraps, a guy named George Zangus. invited me to come over and train at his house. So he had a 3-car garage with, weights and dumbbells and all the stuff. And he was an old power lifter, and he would invite different guys from the high school to come and train with him because he needed training partners. He was probably in his 50s and 60s. And he liked to train with young guys and liked to mentor them, and, not in a creepy, weird way, but as you should in the strength conditioning world, you should always have, being able to pass it on. And so we would come, and I really learned how to train in a 3-car garage with old man Zangus. And we became really good friends. One Saturday turned into 4 days a week. And so I would end up training at the high school with our football team, leaving and going over and training with him. He'd call about 6 o'clock at night and say, hey, I'm gonna be home in an hour. Let's train at 7. And I would just go over there and train twice a day and got real strong. Ended up, I think when I started lifting weights, I was 6 foot, 165 pounds. And when I left high school, I was 6'4", probably 250 pounds. And then, got a ton of scholarship offers. Decided to go to UC Berkeley just because academically it was the best school on the list. And I really had no aspirations of playing pro football. I never even thought about it, never entered the equation. I was just more excited that I was going to get a scholarship to be able to go to college, get my school paid for, and get to go to one of the best universities in the world, so UC Berkeley. So I remember when I was sitting with my dad, he's like, which of these universities couldn't you have got into on your own? And I was like, I don't think I could get into Berkeley. I mean, the valedictorian in my high school didn't get in. And that's how I selected it. So, in hindsight, if I'd known I was going to play 10 years in the NFL, I probably would have either gone to Nebraska. It was 1994 in the heyday of Nebraska. So I took a trip to Nebraska. Colorado was pretty good. UCLA and SC. Coming from Southern California, everybody goes to USC or UCLA. I didn't want to be another SC stooge. The whole dun, 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 dun thing drove me crazy.
Yeah.
And UCLA, the powder blue uniforms, fucking bothered me. I'm not going to go out and whip somebody ass in a pale gold helmet and a powder blue uniform.
Was Deshaun Foster? No, he would have been a little bit younger, maybe.
Yeah.
Foster, yeah, just a little bit.
So
could have blocked for somebody good.
Yeah, that's true. So I purely selected Berkeley, not on the strength of football, even though my offensive line coach at Berkeley was a guy named Tom Cable. Ended up being head coach of the Raiders, and he's a pretty famous offensive line coach. I mean, he'd had a lot of offensive linemen come out of Cal. So probably selecting Cal for the education and having Tom Cable as my offensive line coach was probably a pretty good recipe for being able to go on and play at the next level. So it really wasn't even anything like I was saying, I didn't really think about it as much. I just was out there trying to play and fucking survive. And what really kind of sparked the interest was as a redshirt freshman, I was playing on the scout team, and I was playing left tackle, and every day I was going against a guy named Reagan Upshaw. And by into my second year, I think Reagan was a year or two older than me. He left early and was like a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. So all of a sudden, that next year, I'm watching him play as a rookie, and he's out there, doing what he does and actually being pretty dominant and fucking dudes up. And I'm watching this thinking, I did better against him in practice than I'm seeing these NFL guys do.
Yeah.
And that was really the first inkling. And there was another guy, Dwayne Clemens, who was the other side defensive end. He was also a top 10 pick. So Cal had, maybe top 15, had 2 first-round picks on the D-line. And I went against those guys every single day for years. So all of a sudden I'm seeing these guys going out, and they're not only starting in the NFL, but they're rushing the passer, they're doing everything, and they're kind of handling dudes. So at that point I was like, well, shit, if I could handle those guys, and I played at a pretty high level against those guys, and they're out there, making a name for themselves in the NFL, maybe this is something potentially I could do.
Right.
And I was pretty strong. I squatted, 610 when I was 19 and benched 500 when I was 22. And, ended up, growing another 2 inches in college. So just a hair under 6'6", and, weighed 305, 310 pounds. So, for the first day I stepped in the weight room at 6 foot, 165 pounds, all of a sudden now I'm 23 at 6'6", 305, 310 pounds.
So what was, when you were training with the powerlifting coach, George, I think he was his name.
George Angus.
So when you were with him in high school, 4 days a week, sometimes, you train with the high school team, then you go to his house in the afternoon or in the evening.
Yeah.
What was like a training split looking like at that time? Like what would you do? Let's say you go Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. What would that look like?
We would, Saturdays were always the big squat day, and anybody that knows George knew that like squatting took like 3 hours because it was like anywhere from 5 to 10 minute rests in between sets. And we would do anywhere from, on a bad day, 10 to 15 actual working sets, which like now in understanding volume and intensity and all the stuff that we've done was pretty ridiculous. And then there was, that was kind of a max effort day. And then we would go, usually finish it up with a full, a few max effort pulls. George's philosophy towards the deadlift is you treat the deadlift like a pretty girl. You give it no attention. And at the time, when you're 14 or 15 years old and this guy's telling you this, you're like, okay. Like there was a lot of life lessons that I laugh at now that as a 14, 15, 16, even 18-year-old kid I didn't get.
Yeah.
So we could pull a few reps. Then during the week, we would have a max effort upper day, and then there was an accessory upper, and then there was an accessory kind of lower back day. So George felt that you build the back and the deadlift through accessory work. You build the squat underneath the bar, but you still need to do accessory work for the legs. And then, obviously we did a bench. He only ever had me do close grips. So that's why if you look at a lot of power athlete programs, we use a ton of close grips. And the reason we got into it was we started kind of figuring out what position I need to be strongest in. And anatomically, especially for punching in football, we were always looking at like a vertical forearm, never too far out, kind of the, stacking. So for me, that was close grips. And we did a ton of, that was really close grips, dumbbells, dips, and just a ton of upper back accessory work. George was friends with Fred Hatfield. So the conversation we had every Saturday was about compensatory acceleration. You can imagine, going back into, the early 90s and being 14, 15 years old and having your strength coach talk to you about, compensatory acceleration. As mechanical advantage increases, so does speed. So, and then we would use that with every single movement. We would focus, and he would coach compensatory acceleration. And the reason being is he always, when we'd always ask, hey, why are we using this? He goes, as mechanical advantage increases, so does speed. And he'd reference his good friend, Dr. Fred Hatfield, who we've had on the podcast before he passed away, rest in peace. And that translated to when you hit a guy, I don't want you just to put your hands there or your head there. I want you to aim for a position 4 to 6, 10 inches behind them. So you're not just trying to put your hands there, you're trying to punch your hands through the individual. So as mechanical advantage increases, so does speed. So as your hands, let's say on a punch as an offensive lineman, as I'm punching my hands out, most people are just trying to set their hands. I was trying to mentally punch my hands through, and I always imagined myself punching people and my hands coming out their back. Same thing with hitting. As I was running and dipping to explode into a guy, I wasn't just trying to hit them. I was trying to put my helmet through them and aim for a position 4 to 6 inches on the other side of them.
So every movement you were doing was intent would be as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We George joked that moving a barbell slowly was akin to getting splinters in your ass sitting on the bench. And I've used that analogy too. So everything we did, whether it be, heavy deadlift, heavy squat, bench, whatever. And he always said, I want you to move with max intent. Now what's going to dictate speed is going to be the weight on the bar. You're never going to be able to move, 95% as fast as you did 60%, but as long as you're moving with the same intent, then we're getting where we need to accomplish. Dips were a major accessory for us, traps. And that would, those were the kind of the 4 days. So
what was the back work, like the lower back work that you would be doing?
Reverse hypers. So I said, he was friends with Louis Simmons and Westside Barbell. So we had one of the very first commercially available, or even, after Louis had it patented, we had one of those in the early 90s. So we did, it was anywhere from, I think it was like 100 to 200 reps a week. And he'd always be like, did you get your 100? And, if you hadn't, you're going to do 200 on a day. And if you'd been there 4 days a week, you get 25s. And so we did a lot of that. It was a lot of, heavy bent over rows, a lot of single arm rows, and a lot of upper back work, especially a lot of like incline shrugs. Talk about training the traps in two different ways, like a Kelso and then more upright. And a lot of grip training. And he had a steep driveway that we did some GPP stuff on occasion. And, but yeah, I mean, he, one of the negatives though, looking back on it, because he was the inventor of the super suits and the wraps, and was big into equipment and was an equipment, kind of a knee belt wrap, single ply lifter. We used equipment way too early. So,
Okay.
I mean, we were 14, 15 years old, wrapping our knees and wearing belts for fucking warm-ups. So that was a huge hole, and his idea was that you got to learn the gear. But the problem was like, it was stupid. I ended up, getting pretty severe patellar tendonitis just from the fact that the knee wrap was just smashing my, patella in. I didn't really, I've since changed the squat form pretty dramatically. George wanted a real vertical shin, real flat shoe. Really wanted to sit back into the energy of the wraps, and if he was wearing a suit. So we got coached that way. I think that is the exact opposite of how I coach my athletes. I want positive shin angle. I want that knee, parallel, if not over the toe. Because, that loaded dorsiflexion, knee over the toe, that position is a more applicable position for squatting and strength. The bar position for George was a little bit lower than I like. I like more base of the traps. His bench technique I still use. The deadlift stuff I still pull conventional. He thought sumo was cheating, as I think most people did. But George is a pretty famous dude. He coached the Thompson Powerlifting team and had Bill Kazmaier and Odie Wilson and all these super famous guys. So when you show up on a Saturday, you never knew who was going to be there. And it was kind of a neat environment in those days.
What was the biggest difference then going from high school to training with him to going to Cal? Like, what was maybe exercise wise, culture wise, everything along those lines? Like, what was the biggest thing where you're like, did you ever, I guess, what was the biggest difference? And then were you ever sitting there like, I think my high school training might have been better, or did that not cross your mind?
No, I thought our high school training kind of sucked. My football coach was about a 5'3" ex-Marine who thought that speed work was 16 220s.
16?
Yeah, that was a typical speed workout for us. We go out and we run 16 220. So we'd walk a 220 or a 200, let's say, run a 200, and we just basically do that for 4 miles.
Oh God!
And that was a speed workout, and he was a distance runner, and that was what he liked. And we had a strength coach who had been like a former bodybuilder, kind of an old guy that came in, a guy named Jim Rundell, who was a nice guy. But his stuff was a little archaic. But I figured out pretty quick. I think, I forgot what year it was, but there was a weird deal in middle school. I was always a fast runner. Like, I've always been fast. And then all of a sudden I grew a bunch in middle school and I wasn't fast. And I remember that we would get timed every Friday on a timed run. And then based on how we did on the timed run is the grade we got. So I remember I used to get A's, and then all of a sudden I grew a bunch and I was slow and I was getting C's. And I talked to my teacher and was like, I can't come home with a C in PE. Like, my mom will fucking torch me. And she's like, well, you can stay after on Fridays and do another run, and I'll basically give you extra points and you can, get a better grade. I was like, done. So I tell my mom, like, hey, I got to do some study hall thing after school on Friday. I need to get picked up a little bit late. And then I would just go do another timed run. And I remember asking my teacher, and who was actually a lady, and now that I think about it, pretty switched on. I asked her, I was like, is it going to be like this forever? And she's like, no, when you go to high school next year, you'll lift weights and all this will fix itself. And she had been at the middle school for years, and she had all these guys that had gone on to be pretty good football players in high school. None of them played in the NFL, but had gotten college scholarships. And she's like, I saw this happen many times before, that all of a sudden the boys grew really fast, they got slow, and then when they went to high school and they started lifting weights and playing football, everything fixed itself, it righted itself.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. So I did that, got through, got my grade, didn't have to go to my mom and show her I got a C in PE, which would have just been humiliating. You know, I know in today's culture, shame and humiliation is somehow viewed as a bad thing. It's not. Like a little bit of shame and a little bit of humiliation, like will force you to do a lot of things. And I didn't sit around and be like, oh, poor me, I'm not fast. I was like, well, fuck, what do I have to do? Because I don't want to have to listen to this.
Yeah.
When my mom comes home and tells my brothers that I got a C in PE, they're going to just fucking ride me. So it's easier just to do something about it. But while I was in this kind of deal, I went to the library and I checked out a book on speed. And I like Dewey Decimal System, pre-internet, hey, and there was a speed section, and in there was a book, and I remember the guy showed like a drawing of like running downhill, and a 1 to 3% grade, you can, increase your speed through overspeed. So I remember thinking like, oh shit, like that's all I remember from that book. Didn't talk about weight training, it just talked about that, and that's the thing. So I remember riding my bike around the neighborhood, looking for
this book.
It could have been, yeah. So, like in the book, though, I like rode around the neighborhood looking for a slight decline to run on. So I ended up finding one, and I would go out there like 2 or 3 days a week, and I would run like 6 to 10 as fast as I could downhill, to the point where I remember my buddies were like driving by or riding their bikes by to go play Over the Line, which was a baseball game we played, and they were like, "What the fuck are you doing?" I'm like, "Trying to get faster." They're like, "You're a dork." And ended up going to high school, and I was really excited. Like, okay, here's where it starts. And we come in, and there's like 80 kids in a weight room. There's a coach over there reading, Sports Illustrated. There's a whiteboard with like, BS, this and this. And we were basically something called the Russian squat program, which was like 6x2, 6x3, 6x4, 6x5, 6x6, and then you go 5x5, 4x4, 3x3, 2x2. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that's what we ran on bench, squat, and deadlift. So I come in, and the first day is 6x2, and you're like handling a weight, and like it was so poorly done. Like part of the thing where we put out Bedrock and we always work with coaches in this is because I remember like navigating this minefield. Like nobody taught us how to squat. Like it was just, the older guys are trying to teach us, but like they're just fucking more about talking shit. So I go on that first day, and I remember I benched like 115 pounds. And so my working sets were like at 85. The problem is everybody benched 135, so nobody wanted to take 45s off. So I'm over there like in the corner. So I just maxed out every single day we came in there until I benched 135, which took like 3 weeks. Right? Like that was the level of like coaching and what we had. And I was super disappointed. Like, I was like, fuck man, I thought I was going to like learn this stuff. And like, I had these visions of like, Rocky and Ivan Drago, where he's like in this training facility. Like I had like the 80s vision of what I was going to get. And I remember seeing that Alzado guy. I'm like, there's no way he did this.
Yeah.
And then that's when old man Zangus was like, threw me a lifeline, and started training with him. And then I ended up getting a training partner who was one of the guys that trained at George's place, a guy named Tasso Papadakis. His brother Petros, for you guys that are listening, is a pretty famous sportscaster. And, I grew up with Tasso and Petros, played football with them. Tasso was like the strongest dude under 16 in America. He like benched 315 for 10 and squatted 500 for 10 at like 15.
That's crazy.
He's a fucking monster. And all of a sudden, like, he's my training partner. And he's like, hey, like you and me, we're in it. And so he would drive to my house, pick me up. We'd go train. Like, he really took me under his wing at a point where I was like, didn't really know, that kind of young, like that mentorship. And it was cool to have like an upperclassman and a dude with the car kind of take you under his wing and help me. And it was, I'm super thankful and grateful for that experience. But being like mentored into the strength game is a real deal. And, he ended up getting a scholarship to go to USC. So when I got a scholarship offer to go to USC, I'd been out there. I didn't want to live in South Central. Most of the guys lived in Manhattan Beach, which was down the street from my house, and it just didn't work for me. And I wanted to go away to school. I wanted to go have my own life and my own experience, and being, 30 minutes from home where, you can stop in and go home anytime you want. Just didn't feel like growing up to me. And so I selected to go to Berkeley, which, like I said, my dad's like, what degree do you want to hang on the wall? And so I went to Berkeley, and it was a great experience. It was extremely difficult for the mere fact that you're playing football full time. The old joke was like, football is number 2, school is number 1, and we couldn't take a class past noon, and, football is all encompassing, but then you're also in a extremely competitive university where, people don't give a shit that you play football. And if you do, I remember my first day of class as a freshman, I had a class called Education 40 with a really pretty famous professor, a guy named Pedro Noguera. And he pulled me aside after and said, "Oh, you're a young football player." And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Don't wear your football stuff to class." And he's like, "I saw you wearing glasses. Wear those more often. Like, dress a little nicer. Like, don't let somebody." And I was like, "Well, like all the other football players wear all their stuff." He's like, "They're black. The black guys are going to get away with a lot more. There's going to be a lot more culture associated with it. You're a white dude. This isn't going to bode well for you. So play the part a little." And I was like, "Okay." And that class was extremely impactful to kind of like, understand that there's stereotypes and you can be mad about it, but it's just how it works. And you either learn to work within the system or you get fucking jetted out of it. And so I went in and, did pretty well. Continued to play myself in and ended up, kind of my plan was to graduate in 4 years and get my master's in my fifth and then go to law school. And there was a 4-year a scholarship for a 4-year letterman to go to Bolt Hall that I'd applied for, and then I ended up getting drafted and second pick in the 4th round and coming in and starting as a rookie and basically become a starter in the NFL for 9-10 years.
So what was training like at Cal? Like, what was the lifting like there versus, I guess that would be the thing, that what was Cal's strength training like versus Angus, and then what was Cal's strength training like versus what you were going to be doing in the NFL?
Yeah, when I showed up, we had a great strength coach, a guy named Eric Cohn, who was, kind of a little bit of, a lot of powerlifting, a little bit of Olympic lifting, a lot of just, mat drills and speed work. And, kind of what you would expect from like a more traditional strength conditioning program. And he had been an assistant at Washington when they won all those national championships, with Steve Atwater. Yeah, in the early 90s. And they came over, and he was a good dude. I really liked him. But then in my 3rd year, he got let go. They brought in Steve Mariucci, and he brought in a new strength coach, a guy named Todd Rice. So for those of you guys that don't know Todd Rice, he is the private coach for the Busa brothers. So okay. He was a strength coach at Cal, then he went to the Ivy League, and then he was at Pitt, and then ended up, working as basically the private strength coach for the Busa brothers, who are pretty fucking fit, pretty strong. But Todd came in and was a extremely prickly individual, right? But I got along really well with him and was an incredible strength coach. And a lot of what you see in Power Athlete today and the lessons and the training and just the modeling that I learned in those years have basically prepared me and catapulted me for the next, many, many years. So he was a pure Olympic lifting program. I didn't front squat for almost 2 years, or I only front squatted I didn't back squat the entire time he was there, only front squatted. Ended up front squatting 500. We did snatch, clean, and jerk. I snatched 130, clean and jerked 172 and a half, ended up power cleaning more than that. But it was heavy presses. He did not want me to bench press, even though I benched 500. So we would have to go down to the rec center and bench because he only wanted us to overhead press, and he thought bench was a waste of time. But we did, over speed and plyometrics and jumps, and we used a lot of post-activation potentiation training and a lot of, it was really, really slick. He did an excellent job. I feel like it was a little too Olympic based. I don't necessarily use full variations in the lifts with our athletes. It's just, it's a longer pull on a power snatch and a power clean than it is. And we do so much squatting and so much single leg work and so much that I don't need, the athletes to do both. So what I like for the violent hip extension and triple extension. And so I've kind of varied my programming a little, but in terms of like vertical speed, change of direction, lateral, understanding, sagittal, and different three planes of motion with transverse and frontal plane. His stuff was really slick. It was really well done. Everybody jumped. Everybody performed. And I feel very, very lucky to have been in that situation. So when I showed up in the NFL, I came in and started as a rookie, and then I ended up getting hurt. But the strength program that we had at the Eagles was a one set to failure, hammer strength kind of machine based. The old Penn State one set to failure, high intensity
Just
program.
absolute trash at Penn State.
Yeah. So, but you could not imagine a more different program than what I had come from. I come from this pure Olympic lifting, snatch, clean and jerk, plyometrics, jumps. We're over there watching, Bulgarian training videos on VHS. I mean, it was, Ton had gone to the Eastern Bloc and had like been to Bulgaria and Russia and into their training halls and had all these like handheld video camera videos of these guys training. They're over there smoking cigarettes in between sets.
Between squat sets, yeah.
Yeah, like the guys come in, no shirts. They're wearing, sweatpants with no underwear and Olympic lifting shoes with no socks. And they're all of a sudden just coming in cold. Like it would, and then like they would go over and like, they were doing a ton of pap. They'd snatch something and then go over, jump something. And, with a cigarette, as they're blowing out smoke in between lifts. And then you show up and it's like, here's row A, B, and C. I want you to do one set to failure and then you're good, done in 15 minutes. And I remember being like, can I go through again? And I'd end up going through like 3 times and the strength coaches were like, yeah, sure, whatever the fuck you want, So, and then I got hurt and Tom Canavy, who was the assistant, who's still a great friend of ours, cheers to the Colonel. He kind of like took me under his wing and I was like, hey, do we have to do all this? He's like, yeah, we do. Just, Wolfie, who's the head guy, we just got to do a little bit of it so that he sees us. And then we'll just go lift free weights. So we had fat bars and trap bars. We did everything. And so we would do that as the warm up and then we'd get to the back. And then that's when the real work started. Because the way it was kind of a long, skinny weight room, Wolfie was in front, he'd see us go down and then we were just fucking around back there for an hour. And then after that first year, I rehabbed with them, trained, and then I came back and started 16 games. That second year, my older brother at the time was living down in Tampa. So we bought a house together and I went down to Tampa and the Eagles refused to give me an off-season workout deal. So there was no money for me to train in the off-season. And I was like, well, shit, if you guys aren't going to give me an off-season workout deal, I'm not going to live there. So I went down to Tampa and had this cool little condo and reached out to my agent. And I said, hey, is there somebody I can train with while I'm down here? Thinking like, I might train with somebody for a little bit, maybe go back once OTAs start. He ended up connecting me with a guy named Rafael Ruiz, who's still a great friend of mine. And I show up and Raf was training a bunch of pro athletes, a bunch of pro baseball guys. And the hilarious part is I show up and like he's like to a track and we got like hurdles and PVC and bands. This motherfucker broke me off for 2 hours with PVC bands and hurdles. And I remember thinking like, dude, we haven't even got to the weight room yet and I'm already smoked. And he was out there. He had a bunch of pro baseball guys and like a bunch of track girls. Like it was legit. So we did that and, he's like, hey, we got to get your conditioning in and get you ready to train. And then we went to the weight room and the training was legendary. My biggest regret is that we didn't bring in cameras. We didn't have cell phones. Like this was kind of like when people were filming their workouts. Yeah. Like the workouts we did, if we could have kept those videos, shit like I had, 10 pull-ups with 90 pounds between my waist. We would, we were doing, 585 for triples on the back squat to go over to hurdle hops, and it just was like some legendary training. And I came back that next year after training with Rolf and only showing up for OTAs and this, and they were like, hey, so all these guys made 100% of your workouts. You didn't make a single workout. And I was like, okay, let's fucking do the testing. And so we all lined up and we had a whole bunch of like physical testing. I set every record. I jumped the highest. I ran the fastest. I won the conditioning test. I won everything. And they were like, oh. And then I came in and started. And then every year I would leave and I would come back and I would win it all.
Yeah.
To the point where they built a new facility and they called me and they flew me in so that I could do the workout demo for the media that was coming in, their big media day, and they were going to show the weight room in the facility. They asked me to come in to do the demos on all the weight room stuff. Right. Hey, John, we fly in and do this stuff. I'm like, yeah, it's because I can do a bunch of shit people can't. So during the season we were great because I would go in and just use the one set to failure with as my warm up, and then I'd go bang heavy weights. And the strength coaches at that point were pretty helpful in that designing me programs that fit, and they knew what I was doing and knew what worked for me. And,
so what were you doing on the track with him? Like
with
when
Rafael?
you say like Yeah. What would that, like a week look like of track work, and then a week of I want to see, like, I know I asked about the splits earlier, but like how that week would be built out with the training, if you remember.
Yeah. Well, we would always do all of our plyometrics and jump stuff early. And,
Okay.
we would do, classical kind of warm ups, a lot of like, single leg, a lot of plyometrics with the hurdles, and then get to hurdle hops, do a lot of isometrics and a lot of, eccentric and, some kind of triphasic type stuff with the bands, and a lot of mobility. And then we would run, obviously a different collection of either, anywhere from 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s to 80s, and legitimate track workout where you run an 80 full recovery and come back. And so we did a lot of max effort sprint stuff, a lot of mobility, a lot of work, a lot of step squat and lunge, a lot of step ups, a lot of lunges, and then even like kind of like lunges, with weight up the stadium. And we would do that, like a legit, anywhere from 60 to 90-minute kind of track workout, like what you would expect. And then we would take a short break and, eat a little bit, and then we go in the weight room. And the splits were pretty interesting in that it was kind of based on pushes and pulls. We trained a full body, a lot of accessory, a lot of heavy, pull-ups and dips, and a lot of things I was familiar with. Continued to use compensatory acceleration, and when we got into a lot more of the PAP, that involved a lot of med balls and a lot of short sprint stuff. So I mean, if we squatted heavy, we do 10-yard sprints, a lot of heavy med ball, a lot of slam, and and then we would always end it with some form of like kind of razzle dazzle. So, trying to walk on your hands, cartwheels, because he had a huge gymnastics mat that was pretty thick that we'd roll out. And we just did a lot of just basically moving through space and, trying to just almost play horse. We're like, hey, if I can do this, if I can do a one-handed cartwheel, can you?
Mm-hmm.
And so that first year, the training went pretty well. And then when kind of it was interesting, that next season, I had a bunch of guys be like, hey, what are you doing for your training? I was like, oh, I trained down at Tampa. And I had guys come down, and we ended up with a group of about 17 NFL players about year 5. So we had a really strong group. And, if the internet had existed in the capacity in social media, I would have been on there looking for people that were doing something better than me. And then I would have shown the fuck up and figured out what they were doing. Or I would have been like, hey, this week hey, there's a guy doing something cool. Let's go. But like we were kind of stuck in this little microcosm, because when nobody was filming anything, like it was just kind of word of mouth. You'd see guys after the game, they'd be like, dude, you got that permanent bicep vein. I'm like, yeah, you want to come down and train? This is what we fucking do.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate though. My rookie year, my agent hooked me up with a supplement deal with a guy named Mauro De Pasquale, who wrote the anabolic diet, and pretty famous individual. We have a podcast with him that I've transcribed. I'm working on an ebook. But Mauro was the one that invented carb cycling. The anabolic diet was kind of that initial carb cycling. So anything that you see with carb cycling just basically has been parroted and stolen from Mauro. And he was a wizard, man. He did all my original diet stuff and did my supplements. And really the work that I did in that rookie year, those first 2 years with him, kind of like set the tone for who I am physically going forward. That first year, I remember as we were training, I got big. We got big. I was like 326 pounds, and I was real strong, but I was just too big to play. And I remember being like, I went out there and was like, I think I'm too big. And he's like, no problem, we'll cut. So over the next 6 weeks, we cut to like 306, 308, cut 20 pounds. And he was, knew how to diet people and this and was a power lifter, bodybuilder. And then I came in, and that's where I was, sub 10% body fat at over 300 pounds, which I was the only guy in the bod pod to ever record that. And, been able to really just use those lessons and that information. Cause I had taken nutrition classes at Berkeley because I was always fascinated by it, and for a minor. And all of a sudden, Mauro sends me his book, and we start talking about this thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, saturated fat is good? Wait a minute, high protein diets aren't going to ruin my kidneys?
Yeah.
Right? You're saying that, every time that I sit down and eat a massive bowl of cereal and with non-fat milk, and then I have to go in the bathroom and basically like explode myself, like that's a gluten and probably a dairy allergy because of pasteurized milk. I mean, like literally like the stuff like that people are talking about being like brand new on the internet today.
What's
In
going on back? Yeah.
1999, Mauro had already figured all this shit out. I mean, so much so that Mauro kind of extricated himself from the internet. I still get emails, people, hey, I'm doing a PhD and I'm trying to write my dissertation on this. Can you put me in touch? And I'm like, he just looked at the ridiculousness of the internet and just fucking pulled the plug and does something else and doesn't even talk about this stuff anymore, just because for the fact that, he figured a lot of this stuff out and people are just working to regurgitate his information. But that initial experience and kind of exposure to not only supplements, I mean, like I said, I've been extremely lucky with the people that have come into my life. I mean, 14 years old, 15, when I go start training with Zangus, he came home and gave us this big box. And he's like, hey, I want you to take a teaspoon of this in the morning and at night and just keep taking it. I'm like, what is it? It's this thing called creatine. So I, have been taking creatine. I joke that I'm the longest continuous creatine user on the planet. I started at 14, and now that I'm 48, I got 34 years of creatine supplementation. And at the time they were like, oh, you're going to pull hamstrings. This is this. And I'm like, no, old man Zangus told us to take it. And now all of a sudden you're reading all this research and, you have all these, I'm going to use fucking profanity. I don't know who listens to your podcast, but all these women that couldn't squeeze out a fart and a bunch of dudes that couldn't fucking lift a single one of my dumbbells with podcasts that have incredible production talking about like, oh, the greatest advancement, for this is creatine and it's a second ATP system and it helps the brain. And they're all sitting there pontificating like they've ever fucking taken enough creatine to shit their pants, or they've only done it like 2 weeks ago because all of a sudden Huberman talked about it. No, legitimately. I mean, we started taking...
I can relate. Yeah, like do you remember when they came out with creatine serum? Do you remember that? Like,
we always took the basic creatine monohydrate, and the reason being is Zangus told us, like, when the creatine came out, I remember there was like Creapure and all these different versions, and he's like, all it is, and he was in the supplement business. He's like, all they're
Pre-alkaline was one too, I think.
Yeah, we used to get in a bottle. He always said that all they're doing is they're trying to make different versions so that they can sell you something that's not as good as the original. Just take the monohydrate, and we still do. So,
and that's it. There's Scott Forbes, a creatine researcher that I'm friends with, and he's like, literally, we've done the research on everything. The performance is like identical across the board.
If it's not better.
If it even, exactly.
Yeah, the other versions have other problems. I mean, he always, Zangus's deal though, was that you needed a transport. So you had to take it with sugary grape juice.
Yeah.
So you basically scoop it in your mouth and then wash it down with grape juice. I mean, but yeah, I mean, that was, so I've been extremely blessed. And I don't use the term blessed in terms of like, some heavenly father or whoever, but I've been very lucky, even though I do believe that there's something bigger. I mean, I'm not a atheist by any means, but whatever the universe has done and put the people to me, I've been very, very fortunate, to meet Zangus when I was young, to go in and have a coach like Todd Rice and have training partners and, kind of be in this kind of situation with guys and, obviously get to the NFL and, that injury taught me a lot early on, and then going in and playing and, meeting Raphael and understanding the training and just the different people that came into my life and those initial things of meeting Morrow. I mean, cause the work that I did with Morrow all those years ago, 20 plus years ago, not only set what you see physically here, but set a lot of the direction for me for the rest of my life. And, I've been eating a high protein diet long before it was cool to eat a high protein diet. I mean, it was 1 gram a pound of protein. Sorry, 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight since the fucking early 90s. Yeah. So I've eaten a high protein diet for, now all of a sudden you're like, you have people selling diets that are high protein diet. It's amazing to me that people kind of go in this direction, and I'm happy. It's kind of like I always joke with people where I'm like, oh, welcome to the party. Like we've been eating steaks and ground beef. I mean, this was what we did. I mean, like there was as you remember, oh, you're going to get cholesterol, you're going to have heart attacks and all this. And Mara was like, that's all bullshit. And, even when I would talk to people and they would bring in nutrition, like nutritionists for the teams, be like, oh, talk to me about your diet. And they tell them, and they'd be like, oh, that's not a diet for performance. I'm like, yeah, but I'm the strongest dude and I'm the leanest guy and I don't get tired.
That makes no sense.
Yeah. So
it's interesting you say that, because I work with South Dakota State's wrestling team, and I send them videos and research papers, and they send a research paper to their nutritionist. This is like a week ago, and it's the one from Jorn Tormalen, where it's like basically up to 100 grams of protein in a single sitting. Like you'll see an increase in protein synthesis, muscle protein synthesis increases all the way up to 100 grams of protein in one sitting. So the
Yep.
more protein you have, the more muscle protein synthesis occurs. And this nutritionist is telling them, no, you don't need more than 25 grams per sitting. And the coaches are like, but this paper just came out like 3 months ago and tells
So
you, like, why
it's
are you ignoring it?
it's standard of care. So it's the same thing with the
Crazy.
doctor, right? So there's like once you get the certifications and you become a doctor, there's something known as standard of care, which means if you get sued, can you sit there with a other group of doctors and they say, well, yeah, that's what's accepted as standard of care. I think for the nutritionist, the same thing, that if they go against something that's the generally like
Conventional.
accepted,
Yeah.
conventional, if they become a maverick and somebody has an issue, then they're going to be on the hook. If they're
Hmm.
prescribing what's considered healthy based upon what a bunch of fat, out of shape doctors that never lifted weights think, then they're potentially liable. I always have, and dude, this is wild. I believe this for years, that bigger people can absorb more protein. Because if you think about like the small intestine, my small intestine has to be bigger than somebody who's half my size. So the
Hmm.
bigger so being basically giving me a prescription for protein based off of a 5'7", 155-pound man, when all of a sudden I'm like a 300-pound dude, seemed crazy to me. And they were like, oh, that extra protein you piss out. I'm like, I don't do protein shakes unless they're 100 grams. I put 4 scoops of everything.
Yeah.
And I've been doing that for years just because in economy, I'm like, well, if I'm going to this is, if I'm trying to get 300 grams of protein and I only want a third of my calories to come from liquid, which we figured out years ago with the bodybuilders I used to train with, that, too much liquid food and you don't spark the metabolism, and then also, the digestion starts in the mouth. So all the chewing and the enzymes and everything in the mouth, if you're just slamming liquid, you're really not turning on digestion. So there was no more than 30%. And so I was like, well, if I got to do 300 grams of protein, I'll do just 100-gram shake. That's my third. And then I get the rest from food. So it always made a lot of sense to me because I had this incredible lab to test everything in, which was the weight room. And I was meticulous in tracking everything. We knew what the body fat was. We knew what the size was. I knew what I weighed. I knew what I could do. I had markers that, in the off season, as soon as I hit those markers, we didn't focus on strength anymore. I focused on, speed and some other things and conditioning. Like for me, it was, 10 pull-ups of 90 pounds between my waist. I would do a workout where it was 5 reps, 495 back squat, 5 reps, 405 bench, and I had to do that 5 times in under 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's legit.
Yeah, so it was 25 reps of each, 495, 400, and we would do that. And when I hit those numbers and I could do, 10 pull-ups of 90 pounds through my waist, I stopped really just focusing on driving strength. At that point, it was just like singles, doubles, and triples for speed, trying to just make sure that we stay nice and strong. And then I would just work on my conditioning and my speed.
So that's what I wanted to ask about this, where it's like, and maybe this is a 2-layered question where, okay, so you have like those baseline, or maybe it's like baseline where it's like, okay, I get to this strength, and then it's like I almost think about it like a flow chart. You go, okay, strength levels here, 90 for 10, 405 for 5, back squat 495 for 5. Now I go here, and this is going to be this realm. Was that something that was easier to figure out at the professional level, or did you also have that sort of
No,
like, all right, okay,
it was at the professional level after we'd been training year after year, because we would do different things. And I remember, the performance numbers we hit, and my goal was to try to get back to those because it's kind of like cliffhanger, right? Over the course of the season, like I mitigated it pretty well over the course of the season. And the way that I did it was I trained heavy all season. I knew that I could recover from intensity, but not from volume. So like, for example, Friday was always my heavy bench day, right? 48 hours before the game is probably by, the end of the week, and my hands are feeling better and I could bench heavy. And so I would put 405 on the bar, and for, season, like day one, game 1, game 2, game 3, I'd probably hit it for as many reps as I could, somewhere between 5 to 7 reps. And then over the course of the season, every Friday I would take 405 out, and as long as I got 1 rep, Some days, and it was kind of like 5 to 7, 8 reps. And then all of a sudden, like this was coming down. And then I was doing, somewhere between 4 and 5 reps, and then triples and doubles. And then by the end of the season, really in like the fourth quarter of the season, I was just hitting it for a few singles. And I would keep intensity high, and I would just cut volume with everything. And I got to the point where I knew the numbers I needed to hit. I just wasn't overly romanced with the volume. I was like, well, hey, I know if I can get under 500 and hit it for a fast single, I'm good. If I can, hit a set of 8 with 585 on the RDLs, 500 for, 1 or 2 reps should be fine. So I would push the dumbbells pretty heavy as well, especially during training camp. I could hit some PRs on the dumbbells. I did a lot of strength work with the dumbbells. The bench was just more of like checking a box. I didn't want to necessarily push the bench just because I think that the potential for injury can be kind of high. But the dumbbells I thought were pretty good. You go in to handle 180s for, somewhere between, 4 to 6 reps. I mean, shit, dude, you feel pretty damn strong.
Yeah. Do you think that's stupid strong. Do you think looking back, you could create like, all right, if I, let's say you're talking about passing on that knowledge. You're like, okay, I got a kid coming up. He's going to try and become a Division I O lineman. Yeah. Would you have like, okay, these are the numbers that I think you've got to hit in high school. These are the numbers I think you got to sustain in college to be good at both levels. Like, do you think you could re-engineer that right now and be like, all right, bench, squat, maybe clean, deadlift, whatever. What would you say with those?
Yeah, but I mean, it's personal in a lot of ways, in that football players don't get paid to lift weights, right? Mm-hmm. All that lifting is, all the GPP, all the strength work is just literally sharpening that knife, right? Sharpening that blade so I can go out and just cut heads on Sunday or Saturday or Friday. Now, what allows you to cut the cleanest head is going to be different for everybody. Because compensatory acceleration was so critical and intricate, or not even intricate, but it was just so like integral into my training from such a young age, that the weight room, every strength or every pound that I got stronger in the weight room, I was able to see it translate on the field. You hear this all the time. That guy's strong as shit for some reason. And it was called Look Like Tarzan, Play Like Jane. Mm-hmm. We used to see dudes like I've told the story when I was at the Eagles. We brought a dude in off the street who came in on a Wednesday that I watched benched 585 for a triple before practice. I mean, I was like, holy shit. The guy lined up. I zone stepped. He stood up. I put my helmet underneath his chin, and like his feet fucking fluttered as I fucking pancaked him. And they cut him before practice was done. You're going to get hurt out here. These guys are fucking killers. Mm-hmm. So this was the Neo splinter in my mind. Why is it that the training that I do translates on the field and the training he's doing is not translating? And I think what it came down to was trunk strength. We have always done a ton of trunk. I hate the word core. Apples and pears have cores. Fat motherfuckers have cores. Jack dudes that look like oak trees with big, strong arms and veins and some shit, and big, strong hands, they have trunks. Mm-hmm. And we did a lot of rotation, a lot of trunk work. I've always, and it hasn't been something that we just did at the end. It's in the warm-up. In every power athlete program, I get like, why do we do so much warm-up with the trunk? And I'm like, because it's the hardest stuff. It's what's required enough to make you healthy to go on for a lifetime. So that's the most important thing. We put it first. And I think that was a key factor, always being strong in my trunk. A lot of the footwork, a lot of the foot stuff, a lot of foot strengthening, making sure that my feet are nice and strong so that I can, 99.9% of the contact with this earth is through our feet. So if the feet are weak, everything's going to be weak. So feet, trunk, and then using compensatory acceleration and realizing that as mechanical advantage increases, so does speed. I think putting those three things and prefacing those into the training, I saw translation on the field, that I could hit harder, I could punch harder. I mean, the scouting report on me, which was funny because Strahan would always tell me this. He's like, man, whenever they fucking put you up there, when they do the scouting reports, when we go play the Eagles, they always circle this dude. And they're like, don't let this dude hit you. This dude's a straw that stirs the drink. Don't let this guy fucking hit you. Fast hands, he's going to fucking beat you up. Like, don't get into a hand game with this dude, because I always had fast hands and they were big, strong punches, and I could shoot those motherfuckers like dropping bombs. And if I missed, I had the ability to stay low, bend my knees, move through space. So even if I missed, I could still make up for it athletically. But like the gifts that I had were unique to me, so much so that when we were at the Eagles, I remember my offensive line coach showing the young guys video and being like, don't do this, Johnny does this. You know, for the same reason I played with Will Shields and Brian Waters, and there was shit that those guys did that I could never do. So being able to find pretty early on what your wheelhouse is and who you are. And, you know, I mentored a young NFL player this offseason who just got hurt on Sunday, which fucking sucks. But a big part of our conversation was you have to find out who you are. You have to figure out what your wheelhouse is, and we have to develop it and sharpen it, and that's who you are. You know, you can look at all these different, say, really, I like this and like this, but it comes down to who you are. And for him, he was a big, strong individual. I was like, I want you to come off the ball. You're going to zone step. You're going to bring your hips. You're going to stay low. You're going to drive your head and hands, and you're going to road grade motherfuckers. And in pass pro, you're just going to be, you know, you're going to be good on your set. You're going to sit back and fucking just launch your hands. But that comes very specifically from training individuals and seeing what gifts they have. I think the best offensive line coaches in the world either draft dudes that fit within their system, or they go work with the best athlete they can and they figure out like, okay, what does this guy have? What are his intangibles? What can he do? Now I'm going to coach him to be the best version of himself. So when I went to the Eagles, I remember they were giving me tapes on like Trey Thomas and all these dudes that are like, you know, black dudes that were like 6'8", 360. And I finally asked my offensive line coach, do you have any like 6'5", 6'6" white dudes that are about 300 pounds? And he was like, yeah, I'll cut you those tapes. So he showed me like Jumbo Elliott, and he showed me Jim Lachey and Zimmerman and all these dudes that were about my size. And like, I was like, oh shit, like that's how they're doing it? All right, I'm just going to do it like them. And then when they moved me into guard, you know, that's when I was able to kind of hone my own technique. And the reason being is I always had good hip flexibility, so I could stay really low and I could actually move through space pretty low. So that really helped me.
You ever think when you were just saying this, I'm thinking through this, I'm going, okay, I oftentimes will look at training and I'm like, if you think about bodybuilding, powerlifting, weightlifting, let's just say those three. And then you look at an athlete and it's like, all right, which one do they need more of? Which one do they lack? And it's almost like, I don't know how you just pitched that. I started to think like, it's funny because you, as an like coaching athletes in different sports, it's almost like, all right, this kid has no stability. He might benefit from just a lot of bodybuilding work and a lot of powerlifting work. Or this kid's cock strong, but he's got no pop at all. Can't jump. Let's do more plyos, maybe some more weightlifting movements. Like, is that almost how you're looking at like this kid that you're working with? And maybe it's a couple layers deeper even because you're working with, you're talking about some of the technical stuff, but is that how you would almost think about it in the weight room?
Yeah. I think the training fills deficits, but it takes you as the individual and the coach to see where their deficits are. You know, and there's a pretty interesting phenomenon where the body will not allow you to go into a range of motion. It cannot create stability. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right? Like it just, like your body just isn't wired that way. So when you see a lot of athletes doing things, is it because they can't get into the position or they can't do it because they can't create stability? So I've seen a lot of cock strong people that can't jump, right? Mm-hmm. Do they need more plyometrics and more speed and more focus work? Yeah, they definitely need. They've probably leaned too heavy on certain things and they need to balance it out. Now, can you take those individuals and make them better versions of themselves? Yeah. But it's pretty interesting. And I've been very fortunate to have some really good athletes. You know, I trained some of the top Brazilian jiu-jitsu players in the world. And it's really interesting to see the guys that are extremely talented at jiu-jitsu and have a deficit of athleticism. And then there's other guys that are extremely good athletes. And that's where they kind of, you know, what side do they err on? Are they really good at, you know, at jiu-jitsu, but they're not as good at athletes, so they play a certain game. So you can kind of tailor your game based upon it. In the NFL, shit, dude, because the guys you're facing get paid a lot of money and really good, you got to be able to do a lot of different things. And I've never felt that strength was not an asset. And I've never felt that, you know, being athletic and moving through space and bending your knees, I mean, all these basics. One of the big things that I've seen and this goes as guys go up, high school, you can get away, college, in the NFL, you have to be able to bend your knees. You have to be able to play in a low position. You have to be a knee bender, not a waist bender. But a lot of that comes from just showing people how to bend their knees. I don't know, we were talking earlier about squatting, working on dorsiflexion, especially getting the knee over the toe. I mean, you can't sprint without getting your knees over your toes. Thank God that the guy who, knees over toes guy, got a cool Instagram handle and started talking about it and saying, kind of preposterous things like nobody squats with their knees over your toes. I'm the first person to do this, which seemed insane to me because every time you sprint, your knee goes over your toe. There's something called hip extension. I just wrote an article about it. But that idea that for hip extension to happen, the knee has to go over the toe and the knee has to be behind the glute. And if you're not training something that involves hip extension, just standing up from a bilateral, it's called standing up, like you do in a squat, is not training hip extension. Even though you'll hear people be like, oh, I need you to stand up at the top and get hip extension. Hip extension only happens when the knee's behind the glute. So I think there's a lot of these like misnomers a little bit. Like is the squat and the deadlift good at building strength? Yeah, it's great for building GPP and strength. Will it help me get faster? Yeah, if that's your limiting factor. For a lot of people, speed is really the accumulation of all of these things where you get to see if it worked. If you're able to run and you're able to be fast, then the training is probably going in the right direction. If you got slower, you're more stiff and you can't move through space, then we probably need to change the training up a little bit.
What would you use in the weight room, like 2-3 movements, get someone to bend more?
I really like the Bulgarian split squat, especially with the knee behind the glute, so a longer stride, and then we'll kind of block out or go barefoot and really force a ton of positive shin angle and really get them into an elongated position. And what we'll do is we'll do isometric holds at the bottom, so we can do some stuff like that. I do find teaching people to squat below parallel, a lot of times people get real blocked. If you just put a little bit of pressure and they do a little external rotation with their big toe on the ground, most people can squat below parallel. And I know this because I have taught hundreds of seminars and taught thousands of people to squat. And every person that I've taught to squat can squat below parallel. So I get people all the time, oh, I can't squat below parallel. I'm like, come on, I'll show you how. And what happens is that people don't understand that if you put your big toe on the ground and you drive your knee out and do external rotation and fire the glute, like most people can attain that pretty well. So being able to understand that position and then just basically having the trunk stability to maintain it. I feel like so many people are so weak in the trunk and they don't understand how the trunk works. We think about the trunk in terms of extension and flexion, but that's not what it's designed to do. It's designed to stabilize. It's designed to be this strong conduit that connects the upper body to the lower body. And
You think
I was going to say, kind of a lot of the sprint stuff and a lot of stuff I'm talking about, I was another fortunate one. You want to talk about another blessed one. Mauro De Pasquale introduced me to Charlie Francis, and I got on the phone and talked to Charlie, and Charlie and I talked to training, and that was another huge influence in me. At the time, my knee wasn't responding, so Mauro put me in touch with Charlie Francis, and he's the one that prescribed me the EMS protocols that ended up getting my quad to fire. So, he's another guy since passed away.
I was thinking when you were talking about trunk work and whatnot, and then going back to Coach Rice, and I was thinking about how you had mentioned you front squatted for like 2 years straight or whatever it was, or 3 years straight. And I as far as like trunk stability, knee bending, I've often felt that's like this hidden gem of just like, dude, you want to learn how to have a strong trunk. You want to feel what a trunk is you get you wrestle with somebody who's only ever front squatted, like a wrestler who's just front squatted and they wrestle. They're a brick wall because they just naturally have this stable point here, and when they're changing levels constantly, it's like nothing is moving them. I was thinking about that with you individually. I wanted to see what your take was on that.
Yeah, they're awful. I've never thought, I've never claimed that front squatting is a strength, leg strength exercise. It's a fucking trunk stability parlor trick. Like I think back squatting, you can build strength. Front squatting, the limiting factor is always going to be your trunk and your shoulder and your ability to create that shelf. That's why we did so many pull-ups, so that the shelf is strong. I got to have a strong platform on which to place the bar. But yeah, that and there's no way to front squat without positive shin angle and
Yeah.
forcing dorsiflexion. So that was a very, very valuable lesson for me because I came from a powerlifting background. It was, we never front squatted.
Yeah.
So I've had the right people, or I've been exposed to things at different points in my life that I don't know how to recreate. Through this podcast, like I was saying, the NFL kid that came and trained with me this year, he listened to this podcast, listened to Power Athlete Radio, and ended up reaching out through Instagram, and I invited him to come out. And he's pretty good, man. Has some really good intangibles, and just needed the opportunity to be able to go out and just demonstrate and show the work he had been done. I think for a lot of young players, they never get to a point, or eventually they do, but like when your conditioning's high enough and you're strong and you're stable and you understand the technique and everything that's asked of you, and it becomes automatic, all you have to do is go out and let the rubble get cleared away and just go out and play. And so what happens to a lot of young players is they don't know the playbook. They're nervous about this and here and here. Like they would always ask me, like, are you nervous? I'm like, yeah, I'm always nervous before games, but not for the reasons that you think. I'm nervous because this means so much to me. I'm not nervous about what the other guy's done, if he's going to beat me or this. I mean, in my mind, that's not going to happen. I'm nervous because this means so much to me, because this is what I do and it's important. And it's really the only thing I've ever enjoyed ever doing in my life. And that's a hard realization when, you retire. I got to play 10 years and I felt that I could have played much longer had I not got kind of struck down with injury with my knee. But all of a sudden you retire in your early 30s and realize that you got an opportunity to do the coolest thing in the world, and you no longer get to do it anymore. And now you got to live your rest of your life knowing that the coolest thing you ever did in this world, you don't get to do anymore.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah.
But
I mean, think about it, right? I get to go train my entire off season. I get to show up, I get to fight through a training camp, and then I get to go out and I get to go one-on-one fist fight a dude for 3 hours in front of millions of people in the game unis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I get to know exactly how good or bad I am 70 times. And I get to impose my will in fist fight. I would have done it in a fucking dark alley. I would have done it for, without the people there. That was the addiction. That was the drug. That was what I enjoyed doing. And I enjoyed the training. I enjoyed the strategy and what we're going to do, and then being able to go out and just fucking unload and, force your will on somebody. And, and then all of a sudden one day they just take it away from you and say, yeah, we don't need you anymore. Go fuck off. Go do something different. And you're like, but I really like doing that. And I never really wanted to coach. I always felt that those that can, those who can't coach. And so that coaching, and that's no ripping on coaching because it's a very difficult profession, but in my mind, like that was like the final, conceding of it, to some extent as an entrepreneur and a guy that runs his own business, going and like taking a full-time job with a company and getting hired might have like concede, like maybe I'm not an entrepreneur. So like, but there's also the idea where you get offered a nice job or somebody's like, hey, I want you to come do this. And I'm like, I'm not necessarily an employee. I'll come in a different role, but I really liked playing football. And
So
it was like one of the coolest things I ever got to do, but not because, fucking Taylor Swift and this and all that other, but I got to give a shit about that stuff. I just wanted to go one-on-one fist fight a dude for 3 hours. And
I wanted to ask you some questions like one-offs, and one is right off of this is like, who's the toughest, like give me two of the toughest opponents you ever faced.
There was a guy that I played against early on in my career, a guy named Keith Hamilton. And the Hammer, as his nickname was a big, strong dude, played for the New York Giants. And I learned so much playing against that guy for the mere fact that his level of intensity and hatred and what he brought to the game was fucking downright fearful. He had a move where he would stand straight up and give you his chest and let you hit him as hard as you want and lock on. Once you were locked on in a great position, he would take his hands and he would lift them off you. Right, grab you by the wrist, lift your arms, and we called it the forklift, cross your arms, and then throw you past the quarterback and sack your quarterback. And it was frightening to have a grown man grab you by the wrist, and you're like doing this, trying to get him off, and he's just fucking literally just like road grading, like just taking steps forward. So we actually developed a technique based upon that, where we would punch wait for him to grab, and just as he grabbed, we would do a hand replace and a hand replace. The problem was you had to be really fast on the first one because you get one because he knew the second one was coming. So then we would be doing like this, trying to move his hand, and you had to just lock him. And that was a part of the technique, right? Like the elbow would drop, thumb would be up, I'd be in position, and all this would track so that he couldn't. This is unbreakable position. Offensive line play, if you punch like this with the thumb, they're going to break your elbow. So you have to be here this way. And we had a technique that we would practice to prepare for Keith Hamilton. He never got the respect he deserved in terms of all that and, Hall of Fame and whatever. But I would rather play against Warren Sapp every single day, every Sunday for 10 years than have to go against Keith Hamilton twice a year.
Is there anybody else other than Keith Hamilton?
Strahan was really good. John Randall was an absolute fucking nightmare to play against. Those of you guys that don't know John Randall, go look him up. He is by far the scariest individual you're ever going to play against, for the mere fact that he could spin like a top. I mean, I played against Dwight Freeney. I absolutely raped Mathis from the Colts numerous times, and he's going to make it in the Hall of Fame. And Freeney was an extremely scary individual. John Randall was an absolute just like buzzsaw. I mean, he was I loved playing against him. I played against, Stubblefield, and, obviously Michael Strahan was an incredible player to play against. So I was very, very fortunate to play against some really good guys. Jason Taylor, just really, really good players. So, my first start at guard, my second year, I ended up playing against Leon Lett, played against him numerous times. And I was, I think for the, we had, what was the name of the guy? Left tackle for the Browns, Joe Thomas. We had Joe Thomas on the podcast. And he never played in a playoff game, right? So he Hall of Fame left tackle, never played in a playoff game. And when we were talking about it, he always hoped that he would catch a guy on his worst day. We're playing the Browns. They suck. I don't have to go hard. He was banking upon the fact that they weren't any good, and he was going to catch a dude on his worst day. I hoped that I was going to get the best player on their best day on the biggest stage in his proudest moment. I wanted the best of the best in that moment. And that's what I trained for, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to, play in the playoffs and have this. I wanted the guys that I was playing against to be, single season sack record chasing this, and they needed this. I wanted to, play against the guys on their greatest day, on the biggest stage, at the peak moment. And so when we had him on the podcast and he said that, I was like, Jesus Christ, maybe that's the reason this dude's in the Hall of Fame, right? And then as I thought more about it, I'm like, I would have fucking died. Like, I wanted people to bring their best. I wanted to see what you had, and that was, just a difference in mindset.
Who would be like best teammate you ever played with?
Best teammate.
And why?
I played with, let me see. Hold on. Let me get this up. Can you hear me? Does it sound fine?
Yeah.
Okay, I fucking get no snare in my headphones, but it's cool. Tony? What's that?
Tony?
Yeah, no. So I'll start at the Eagles. I played with a guy named John Runyon.
Yeah.
John Runyon played right tackle. I absolutely love that individual.
He was dirty too.
Yeah. We were, they listed the top 10 dirtiest players, and I was on there with Runyon was ahead of me. Runyon.
He was a good shot putter too.
Yeah, he was a fucking great dude. One of the best. I loved the way he played, and I loved everything about him. Then when I went to the Chiefs, I was very fortunate to play next to a guy named Will Shields. Mm-hmm. 14 years, never missed a play. I mean, just a consummate professional, one of the nicest people I ever played against. Extremely intense, well-read, intelligent, just an absolute monster. I loved every moment of playing with him and respected the shit out of him. So much so that, when I didn't necessarily want to play anymore, he reached out and said, "Hey, I need you to come play." And I went back and played. And then, obviously 2 other guys I played with, Jason Dunn, who was our tight end at the Chiefs. JD was like an offensive lineman with an 80s jersey, and we would fuck people's worlds up. And Tony Gonzalez. I have, I've probably the best player I've ever played with, and probably one of the best people I know. Just not only a consummate professional, did the game, played the game better, harder and better, and I think is the best tight end ever to ever strap it up. I mean, people can talk about Gronk, they can talk about Kelsey and all this other guy, all these other people, but in terms of lining up on the line and driving a dude off and fucking people up and being point of attack, like nobody holds a candle to Tony Gonzalez. So, played with Priest Holmes and Larry Johnson and, Deuce Staley and, played with some really great players. And, I definitely liked blocking for Priest. But in terms of, lining up on the offensive line, I mean, playing with Will, playing right tackle next to Will. And then when he retired, I played right guard. And then playing with Tony and JD. Amazing people and incredible football players. And I felt very blessed to have played on that offensive line, which I think was one of the best in pro football. I was very fortunate to play on 2 offensive lines that were probably some of the best in pro football.
What about coach-wise? Best coach you've ever had?
Best coach. Andy Reid's a pretty good fucking coach. We got into a little bit of a personal battle, with some promises that were made that didn't happen, and I was pretty young, said some shit I probably shouldn't have, and ended up getting traded, but got traded to Kansas City and play for Dick Vermeil. So, and Dick was a great coach as well. So I was very fortunate to play for those 2 guys.
Okay, I got a question now. 2 training books. You get a high school kid. I want to ask you 2 more questions. 2 high school kids says, "What book should I read for training?" Do you have any recommendations? Like, dude, you got to read this. Like,
for a high school kid,
or even college.
Man, I like Science and Practice. Zadaskorsky's Science and Practice. I think brought more into focus for me than any other book I read. And I didn't read it until, I was later in my NFL career. I didn't read it early on. But that book, like I looked at it and there was a lot of like, okay, I understand how this whole thing fits together. Like I understand the ideas of volume, intensity, and how this all plays. Like that was a book that kind of pulled it all into focus. Super Training, which I have read, even though I don't know a lot of people that have actually read it, even though everybody has it, very few people have read it. That book, and especially the analogy they were giving about the shot putter. I think there was a bit of research they did where they were trying to get these shot putters bench presses up. And when they got to about 200 kilos, the ball or the shot put moved at the speed at which they want. And the time and the effort that it took to get them to 230 kilos took away from their technical aspect and actually slowed down the shot put. So they theorized that 200 kilo bench was ideal for somebody throwing a 18-pound shot.
Yeah, I think that's chapter 4. I actually know exactly what you're talking about.
So that actually dictated a big part of my own training and kind of setting these metrics where I was like, okay, so the time, so for me, being able to do 405 on the bench and 495 on the squat for 5x5 in sub 15 minutes, like that was capacity, speed. I mean, there was a lot of things. The amount of time that it would have taken for me to work up to try to squat 600 pounds for a single again, even though I could have done it, or bench 500 again, which, on occasions we'd hit some numbers close. But the time that it would take to like hit those upper pink numbers to try to squat 700 or bench more would take away from the speed for me, which was at about 300, 306, 303, somewhere around there. Those pounds and my ability to move through space, those numbers were, because we did it, we pushed it. We tried to bench heavier and squat heavier, and I didn't see it translate to speed when we were running our sprints. So all of a sudden we were running like 30s, 50s, and 70s one day. And I remember Roth would always run with us, and I took off like a shot, and all of a sudden he was super fast, ran track in college and also ran Texas relays. And all of a sudden I'm like on his hip and he could fucking hear me. And all of a sudden he like looked over nervous, and we got done and he was like, fuck dude, like stamp today. What did we do? Like, these are the numbers. Like, this is the fastest you've ever been. And so that like marker of that day, and I was like, well, these are the numbers. This is what we've hit. And he's like, fuck, okay, this is our watermark. This is where we got to get to every year if you're going to run this fast. And I was like, do you think getting stronger or pushing it more? And he's like, no. He's like, at the end of the day, you don't get paid to lift weights. You get paid to be fast. And this is what we got to. So this is the point. And that part in super training, like basically like I had read that, we went out and I was like, done. These are our numbers. And we kind of put together this little kind of like metrics of like, hey, what did we do today in the training? What did we do this week? Oh shit, we did, you did 10 strict pull-ups at 90 pounds from your waist. Boom, that's a good one. What about the dips? What about this? And then that's where we kind of crafted it and then just worked for the next 6-7 years.
Off of that, yeah. Okay, one final takeaway, almost in that light. If you looked at sprints, jumps, leg lift, upper body lift, how many, and there's a kid listening to this, and they said, okay, how many days a week should they, and they're D-line, O-line, how many days a week, general, should they be sprinting?
I think they got to run 3 days a week. I think you have a max effort day, you have a tempo day, and you have probably a bunch of like all like the sprint drills. We would always do our sprint warm up. But I think like going out and doing all like the plyometrics and all the hurdle stuff and, just all the fucking sprint stuff that you see the pros do. I mean, the things where you're like kind of watching it like, oh, that looks neat. So we'd always have a day, which would be anywhere from like, call it like 7, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 reps, depending on, we had a deal where we had a certain amount we had to hit. And if you started to run slow, you got one more rep. If you didn't run fast, then you got done, which was the Charlie Francis. The only way you get fast is by running fast. Running slow doesn't mean slow. So you're either running faster than 92% or you're running slower than 75. So when we go out and sprint, we get 4 or 5 reps. And as long as we were getting faster on every rep, but that really came down to capacity and aerobic capacity and just your ability to recover in between. And did you take enough? So if you ran slower on the next one, we rested longer. And if it was slow again, we were done. If it was fast, we continued. And, you get fast by running fast. We came back and we'd run tempo runs, and it was usually in a set distance and just a lot of technique work. And, for the lower body, usually 2 days a week is pretty good. Upper body, too good. 2 days. I really like a 2 on, 1 off. And even on that off day, you're still doing some form of like mobility and sprint and technique and, kind of things that aren't extremely neurologically taxing.
Would you put the jumps in with the sprints almost like on that drill day?
Yeah, and we put them in the lift. I've always believed that the bridge between the weight room and the field are plyometrics and jumps. Mm-hmm. So just being able to look at how many jumps over the course of a week in different plyos, and if you want to do box jumps or bounding or, kind of what the different positions are. I mean, I don't, a lot of the jumps we do just aren't sagittal plane. We'll do frontal plane stuff. We do a lot of transverse and a lot of rotation. But I've always been a big post-activation potentiation guy. So we're going to do something heavy, we're going to jump, or we're going to sprint, or we're going to move. And if the guys are overloaded and neurologically taxed, we can use, we have one of those torque sleds, which, there's no eccentric load on a sled. So all of a sudden you get down with something heavy, we can push that. I like a lot of task-specific tension work, which happens when we swing the kettlebell, that idea of like being able to load and then being able to fire, take a breath, and that task-specific tension, that ability to turn it on and off, I think is massively important in football and in sports. Because like in boxing, right? Like they kind of teach you, and I did pick this up in boxing, they teach you how to stay tight, but not so tight that when you get hit, you get knocked out. Almost like a sandbag that's stiff. Like you got to be able to like, it's hard if you touch it a little, but you can kind of push your hand into it. That's the analogy. And same thing we teach in jiu-jitsu. If you're really hard like a board, you're easy to flip. If you're like a sandbag where you can you're stiff and you're heavy all the time, then you can survive. That's taught through a lot of different ways, but we got a lot of ways to teach it. So I think that position's very important. A lot of the injury mechanisms that I saw offensive line play, as guys would set back as they rotated, they would get loaded, and that's when they would hurt their back. So on the advice of Charlie Francis, we started doing a lot of rotational med ball work. Anybody that knows Charlie knows that he liked non-specific conditioning, GPP work, with implements that weren't specific. Like we weren't going to go out and do, conditioning workouts in the track, even though he had tempo and max effort. He liked a lot of med ball stuff. So I stole a lot of his GPP med ball work, a lot of the rotations, being able to, set it up and like, I need to get 500 throws in the next 15 minutes and, different planes of motion, staggered stance, bilateral, single leg kneeling. I mean, crossbody this, scoops, just a million different things. So I lean very, very heavy on the med ball for a lot of the dynamic stuff we do.
All right, John, that's a lot of information. I hope everybody can roll forward with that. And
I don't know how to. I don't know how to condense this stuff. I mean,
that was plenty. That was perfect. I think it's like that those takeaways of like if some we'll get kids that'll send me and I even wrote down like task specific tension. Like I've called that like momentum training in the past, where it's like sometimes we'll have almost like some of our weightlifters will do like unbroken stuff, or our shot putters actually relating back to the super training thing. It's like, how can you move, let's say 315 as fast as possible? And it's like how to turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on. And it's like, those are really challenging concepts to get a kid to understand. But then if you simplify it, like, dude, that was super simple and super easy to understand.
Yeah. Some of this stuff though, you're inherently wired to do. I've been very fortunate in that, we've worked with a ton of high school kids and this, but like the people that come and train with me physically, are all, tip of the spear, high level professionals. So, I mean, we've worked with, we go out and we do a deal for the guys at development group, and, those dudes are fucking hard chargers, or, a guy comes in who's a, starting offensive lineman in the NFL. I mean, he's already pretty well skilled. So there's nothing where I have a guy who's, I have no future. How can you make it? I mean, even though we've done that, but I've just been very fortunate to be able to work with really good athletes to make them that much better. And I think I err on that side, which is a bit of an ivory tower. Like when I started training the jiu-jitsu guys, I mean, they were already the top players in the world. They just didn't have strength conditioning. So we put a conditioning program, made sure they were strong and stable, got them in shape. I mean, a lot of these things were relatively low-hanging fruit, but I didn't have to worry about their jiu-jitsu. I mean, they were already the best in the world. I just had to give them more skills. So I've been very fortunate in being what I consider a good athlete that's able to work with other athletes to make them better.
You're avoiding the coach term.
Yeah. Well, the joke for me is that coaches were usually guys that were standing in short shorts in the middle of the sun screaming at me while I was working. Offensive line coach, he's in shorts, he's got a whistle, he's out there telling people to bust their fucking ass, but he's not out there in all this gear. He's not out there smashing. It's really easy.
He's 40 pounds overweight.
Yeah. Andy Reid's over there fucking telling me to get my ass going, and you're like, Jesus Christ. So my joke to Andy was always like, I think that it should be like baseball. All the coaches should wear the uniform. And be, all of a sudden like, hey, Pete Rose, the last playing manager, you could be the very first playing coach since like Newt Rockney or whatever the fuck it is. Fuck you. But that's always been important to me. I mean, since that day, I saw Lyle Alzado stroll down, dude. And I just always wanted to be, I just didn't want to be big and strong. I wanted to be strong. And I remember Louis Simmons, just because you're big doesn't mean you're strong. And Louis always said, he's like, I can meet a guy who's big and I can tell you whether he's strong because he has the receipts for the hard work. And, big traps, big triceps. He's like, biceps don't impress me. You can look and you can see the abs through the shirt, and like the guy looks like he fucking trains. You shake his hand and it's like, puts your hands on you and you're like, oh, this motherfucker pulls some weights. Yeah. So like being big and strong has always been a part of my life. But not just being big, being strong, being stable, being able to do stuff. I mean, it's cool to be able to have these guys come in and still train them and do jits and do all the things, at 48 years old, when a lot of guys look like they're slowing down, I still feel pretty good. I mean, it's always funny too, when I go to jits and all of a sudden these guys are like nervous about rolling with me. I'm like, dude, I'm a shitty blue belt. Like, you guys should be fucking killing me. And I'm a 48-year-old dude. Why the fuck are you treating me like ADCC finals? And it's hilarious because these dudes will treat me, and I'm like, and they're just like, so Shanji, who's my coach, is always like, like it's a compliment. Don't be upset about it. So
yeah,
but it's been an interesting journey. I have a book that I got to finish, which is called The Power Athlete, which is kind of all the stuff we outlined and all the philosophy stuff that I need to do. But there's always a slight insecurity that like, will it be good? But then when I see some of the trash out there, I'm like, well, it can't be worse than the bullshit I see.
Yeah. So where can somebody find you? Like,
Dude, I'm easy to find. Power Athlete. Just put it into Google. That's been my brand for a lot of years, and just at John Welbourn on social. I have a blog, Talk to Me Johnny, that I write for, and we also do a bunch of content for Sports Illustrated on the Everyday Warrior channel, and we do podcasts. Power Athlete Radio feels like coming up on 800 episodes. So, which you were an alum of. So we had a great conversation, which led to this one. And other than that, I live in Texas. I live on a ranch, and got a big gym full of weights and weld and build shit, and do all the thing. I raise kids, and as a side hustle, I do some brand advisory stuff. I'm working with with a spice and sauce company right now called Tacticalories, and and I do a bunch of consulting on the side, especially for people that do like fitness technologies and insertion and market stuff. So I do a bunch of consulting and lift weights, train athletes, and fucking fuck shit up when I can.
Thanks a lot, John.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.